It wasn't until I was 7 years old that I realized what a true family should be like. Everyone calls me Becky, even though my name is Rebecca. I was raised believing that all families were cold, aloof, and uncaring, just like mine. I was monetarily supported by my mom, who was his nurse, and my dad, who was a successful dentist with his own practice. Hugs and kisses were alien ideas in our home as far as I can remember. I never experienced any affection from my parents, and I simply thought that was the way things were meant to be. I always had clean clothing to wear, we had a wonderful house, and there was delicious food on the table, but I couldn't identify what was lacking. I never visited the homes of other children, and our family didn't interact much with outsiders. We were alone in our own little world. In retrospect, I see how alone we were, yet it looked normal at the time. When I became acquainted with Sarah, a girl in my class, everything changed. After school one day, she asked me to her place. I recall feeling as though I had entered another universe when I first entered her house. Sarah's mother smiled warmly as she met us at the door. She responded, "Hi, sweetie," and embraced Sarah tightly. "You must be Becky, too. It's a pleasure to meet you." She put her arms around me as well before I realized what was going on. I hesitated, unsure of how to respond. It was a pleasant, reassuring hug. My eyes began to water as all these new feelings swept over me. While working on our schoolwork in Sarah's living room, I couldn't help but notice how different everything seemed. Occasionally, Sarah's mother would stop over to see if we needed anything, give Sarah a brief peck on the cheek, or ruffle her hair. Every time, I experienced chest ache. Sarah's mother volunteered to drive me home when it was time. She smiled kindly at me as we drew up to my house. "Becky, it was a pleasure to have you over. You're welcome at any moment." She then leaned over and gave me a cheek kiss, which really shocked me. "Good night, sweetie." With my head spinning, I staggered out of the car and entered my home. I noticed my parents absorbed in their own pursuits while seated in the living room. My dad was going through some files, while my mom was reading a book. "I'm home," I murmured tentatively. My mother hardly looked up. "Did you finish your homework at Sarah's?" she inquired. "Yes," I said, then plucked up the bravery. "Mom, Dad, why don't you ever kiss me goodnight?" The ensuing hush was deafening. When my mother eventually raised her head from her book, she had a puzzled and irritated look on her face. "Rebecca, what are you talking about? We provide you food, clothing, and a place to live. That ought to be sufficient for you." My heart sank. My dad said, "But that's enough, Rebecca," without raising his eyes from his papers. "Go to your room and get ready for bed." As I laid in bed that night, I became aware for the first time that something was off in our family. I questioned why my parents couldn't love me the way Sarah's mother loved her as I fell asleep, since my house lacked the warmth I had experienced in Sarah's. The sharp contrast between my family and others became more noticeable as I got older. I knew more clearly what was wrong by the time I reached adolescence. The source of the issue was my mother. Mom had always been a chilly woman who didn't appear to be able to feel anything, much less love, for anyone. I observed that she was just as aloof with Dad as she was with me. She appeared impenetrable and uncompromising, like though composed of ice. I became increasingly aware of how overburdened they appeared to be by their parental responsibilities. Yes, they would go to parent-teacher conferences, but there was always a barely disguised annoyance on their faces, as though they would like to be somewhere else. I foolishly thought that things may change when I turned 16. Perhaps they would give me a nice embrace or a thoughtful gift as a surprise. Rather, I received a harsh reality check. Over breakfast, Mom murmured, "Rebecca," in her usual flat voice. Your father and I need to discuss something with you. Dad cleared his throat. We wanted to clarify that you shouldn't count on us to cover the cost of your college education. It is not necessary for us to do so. I felt like I was slapped across the face by the words. Unable to talk, I just gazed at them. Mom went on, you're old enough now to start thinking about your future, oblivious to or unconcerned with my horrified look. If you want to go to college, you'll need to figure out how to pay for it yourself. I nodded numbly, pushing away from the table. Thanks for letting me know, I managed to say before retreating to my room. That day marked a turning point for me. I realized that if I wanted anything in life, I'd have to get it for myself. My parents weren't going to help me. They'd made that crystal clear. After graduating high school, I knew I needed to start earning more money. College seemed like a distant dream, but I was determined to make it happen. That's how I found myself working as a waitress at Joe's Diner, a small local restaurant just a few blocks from our house. Joe, the owner, was a middle-aged man with a perpetual 5 o'clock shadow and a belly that spoke of too many taste tests in the kitchen. When I applied for the job, he looked me up and down with a grin that made me slightly uncomfortable. Well, he said, stroking his chin. You'll definitely attract customers with those looks, sweetheart. You're hired. 3 months into my new job, my life took another dramatic turn. It was a Tuesday morning, and I was getting ready for my afternoon shift when my parents called me down for breakfast. This was unusual. We rarely ate together, let alone had conversations over meals. As I sat down, I noticed my parents exchanging glances. My mother, her face as impassive as ever, spoke first. Rebecca, your father and I have some news, she said, her voice devoid of any emotion. We've decided to sell the house and move to Europe. The sale will be finalized next month. I waited for them to continue to tell me about their plans for me, but the silence stretched on. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. So what about me? I asked, my voice small. Am I coming with you? My parents exchanged another look, this one tinged with what seemed like annoyance. My father cleared his throat. Rebecca, you're an adult, he said, his tone matter of fact. It's time for you to find your own place to live. We fulfilled our duty. You're of legal age now, which means you need to figure things out on your own. Anger and disbelief welled inside me. This is my home too. I shouted, standing up so quickly my chair toppled over. You can't just throw me out. My father actually laughed, a cold, humorless sound that sent chills down my spine. This house is my property, Becky. You have no claim to it. Tears stung my eyes as the full weight of their callousness hit me. Without another word, I ran upstairs and started throwing my belongings into a suitcase. As I was about to leave, my parents stopped me at the door. Show us what's in the suitcase, my mother demanded, her eyes narrowed with suspicion. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Are you serious? You think I'm stealing from you? We just want to make sure you're not taking anything valuable, my father said, as if it was the most reasonable request in the world. That was the last straw. Years of pent-up anger and hurt came pouring out of me in a torrent of curse words and accusations. I screamed at them, calling them every nasty name I could think of, telling them they were the worst parents in the world. They didn't even flinch when I ran out of steam. My mother simply opened the door and gestured for me to leave. With nowhere else to go, I headed to Joe's Diner for my shift, dragging my suitcase behind me. Joe looked up from behind the counter, his eyebrows shooting up when he saw my suitcase. Becky, what's going on? I tried to keep it together. I really did. But as soon as he asked, the dam broke. Tears started streaming down my face as I told him everything. How my parents were selling the house, moving to Europe, and it kicked me out without a care in the world. Joe listened, his face growing more concerned with each word. When I finished, he reached out and took my hand. "Oh, sweetheart, that's terrible. Listen, I might be able to help you out." For a moment, hope fluttered in my chest, but then I saw the look in his eyes, and my stomach dropped. "You could stay at my place," he continued, his thumb rubbing circles on the back of my hand, "but you need to show me how grateful you are." I yanked my hand away, disgust replacing my sadness. "Are you kidding me?" Joe's face hardened. "Fine, have it your way, but if you're not going to take my offer, you can consider yourself fired. I don't need your drama in my diner." I rented a room at a cheap hostel for the night. As I sat on the lumpy bed, I pulled out my phone and opened my parents' social media pages. I'd never paid much attention to them before, but now I scrolled through their friends lists desperately, looking for any relatives who might be willing to help me. One by one, I reached out to them, explaining my situation. And one by one, they turned me down. Some were polite about it, others less so, but the result was the same. No one wanted to take me in. Just when I was about to give up hope, I got a message from someone I'd never met, my mother's aunt, Evelyn. She lived in another state, but said she'd be willing to let me stay with her for a while. With no other options, I used the last of my money to buy a bus ticket to Aunt Evelyn's town. When I finally arrived, Aunt Evelyn was waiting for me at the bus station. She looked a lot like my mother, the same sharp features and steely eyes. "Rebecca," she said, nodding at me. "Welcome." As we drove to her house, Evelyn laid out the ground rules. "You can stay in the spare room. I expect you to keep it clean and help out around the house. And you'll need to find a job. I'm not running a charity here." The next few weeks fell into a routine. I found a job at a local cafe, worked long hours, and spent my free time cleaning Aunt Evelyn's house and cooking meals. She was always polite but distant, watching me with a weariness I couldn't understand. One evening, as I was dusting the living room, my eyes fell on a framed photograph I hadn't noticed before. It showed a young man with a bright smile, his arm around a younger version of Aunt Evelyn. "Aunt Evelyn," I called out. "Who's this in the photo?" I heard a sharp intake of breath behind me. When I turned around, I saw something I never expected, tears in Aunt Evelyn's eyes. "That's my son," she said, her voice cracking. "He died in a car accident 10 years ago." I put down the duster and did something I'd never done before. I hugged her. To my surprise, she hugged me back, her body shaking with silent sobs. When we finally pulled apart, Aunt Evelyn looked at me with wonder. "You know, I always thought you'd be just like your mother, cold and unfeeling." I shook my head, feeling my own tears welling up. "And I thought you were just like her, too." I guess we were both wrong. As the days passed, Aunt Evelyn and I grew closer. The warmth I'd always craved from my parents, I found in her. We'd spend evenings talking, sharing stories, and slowly healing the wounds of our pasts. For the first time in my life, I felt truly loved and accepted. One evening, about 2 months after I'd arrived, Aunt Evelyn sat me down with a serious look on her face. My heart skipped a beat, fearing the worst. Was she going to ask me to leave? "Rebecca," she began, her voice soft but firm. "I want to talk to you about something important. When my son died, I set aside money for his college education. It's been sitting in an account for years now, and well, I've been thinking." She reached out and took my hand, squeezing it gently. "I want you to have it for your education." I stared at her, unable to comprehend what I was hearing. "What? But that's your son's money." "I can't." "You can, and you will," Aunt Evelyn said firmly. "My boy would have wanted it to be used for something good. And you, Rebecca, You deserve a chance at a better life." Without hesitation, I threw my arms around her, sobbing into her shoulder. "Thank you," I whispered. "Thank you so much." And just like that, my life changed again. I enrolled in the local college as a business major, determined to make Aunt Evelyn proud. We settled into a new routine. I'd go to classes during the day, work part-time at the cafe in the evenings, and spend my nights studying at the kitchen table while Aunt Evelyn knitted in her favorite armchair. For 2 years, life was good. Better than good, actually. It was everything I'd ever dreamed of. I had a loving family, I was getting an education, and I felt like I was finally on the path to a bright future. But life has a way of throwing curveballs when you least expect them. It was a crisp autumn afternoon when there was a knock at the door. I was home alone, working on a paper for my marketing class. Assuming it was a package delivery, I opened the door without a second thought. The woman standing on the porch made my blood run cold. Her hair was grayer, her face more lined, but there was no mistaking those cold, hard eyes. "Hello, Rebecca," my mother said, her voice as emotionless as ever. I gripped the doorframe, my knees suddenly weak. "Mom, what are you doing here?" She looked past me into the house, her lips pursed. "I need to speak with Evelyn. Is she home?" I shook my head, still in shock. "She's out running errands. She'll be back soon." My mother nodded curtly. "I'll wait then." Before I could protest, she brushed past me into the house. I closed the door, my mind racing. What was she doing here, after 2 years of silence? Why now? As we sat in uncomfortable silence in the living room, I took a good look at my mother. She wasn't the well-put-together woman I remembered. Her clothes were wrinkled, her hair unkempt. There was a desperation in her eyes that I'd never seen before. Finally, unable to bear the tension any longer, I broke the silence. "Why are you here, Mom?" She met my gaze, and for a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of emotion, but it was gone so quickly, I might have imagined it. "I need help," she said flatly. "Your father and I are no longer together. We moved to Italy as planned. Your father, he met someone else, a younger woman. He left me for her." Before I could respond, we heard the front door open. Aunt Evelyn walked in, her arms full of grocery bags. When she saw my mother, she froze. "Helen," Aunt Evelyn said, her voice clipped. "What brings you here after all this time?" My mother straightened her posture, trying to regain some of her old authority. "Evelyn, I need your help. I've fallen on hard times." Aunt Evelyn's eyebrows shot up. "Oh, and what about your comfortable life in Italy?" "Things didn't work out as planned," my mother replied, her voice tight. "John left me for another woman. I have nowhere else to go. You're my only option." Aunt Evelyn let out a harsh laugh. "Oh, that's rich coming from you, Helen. Do you remember when I needed your help, when I lost my son and couldn't even afford a proper funeral? Where were you then?" I saw my mother flinch, but she quickly regained her composure. "That was different," she said. "Different?" Aunt Evelyn interrupted, her voice rising. "How was it different? Because it wasn't you who needed help." The tension in the room was unbearable. I felt like I should say something, do something, but I was frozen in place, watching this family drama unfold. My mother's eyes suddenly locked onto me. "Rebecca," she said, her voice taking on an edge of desperation. "You owe me. I'm your mother." I felt a surge of anger rise within me. "I owe you. You kicked me out without a second thought. You told me I was on my own, and now you have the nerve to say I owe you." "I raised you," my mother began, but I cut her off. "You provided the bare minimum," I spat out. "Food, clothes, a roof over my head. But you never gave me what I really needed: love, support, affection. You were cold and distant my entire life. And when I needed you most, you threw me out like I was nothing." My mother's face paled. Tears were streaming down my face now, but I didn't care. "And now you come here expecting help. Expecting me to forget everything you've done, or rather, everything you didn't do. Well, guess what, Mom, I'm doing just fine without you. I found someone who actually cares about me, who supports me, who loves me. I don't need you anymore." The room fell silent after my outburst. Aunt Evelyn stepped forward, placing a comforting hand on my shoulder. "I think it's time for you to leave, Helen," she said firmly. My mother looked between us, realization dawning on her face. Without another word, she stood up and walked to the door. As the door closed behind her, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. I turned to Aunt Evelyn, who pulled me into a tight hug. "I'm so proud of you, sweetheart," she murmured, stroking my hair. "You stood up for yourself. You're stronger than you know." As I cried into her shoulder, I felt a mix of emotions: relief, sadness, anger, and strangely, a sense of freedom. For the first time in my life, I had confronted my mother and spoken my truth. It hurt, but it also felt like the beginning of healing. About a week after the incident, I was walking across campus when I overheard a group of my classmates whispering and glancing in my direction. As I got closer, I caught snippets of their conversation. "That's her, the one whose mother. Can you believe she'd abandon her own mom?" My stomach dropped. How did they know about what happened? I quickened my pace, my cheeks burning with embarrassment and anger. It didn't take long to figure out what was going on. My mother had taken up residence in a cheap motel on the outskirts of town and had started showing up at the college, telling anyone who would listen about how her ungrateful daughter had abandoned her in her time of need. For days, she sat on a bench near the main entrance, accosting students and staff alike with her tale of woe. My classmates began to whisper behind my back, some giving me looks of pity, others of judgment. I tried to ignore it, to focus on my studies, but it was hard. One afternoon, after a particularly grueling class where I could feel everyone's eyes on me, I broke down and told Aunt Evelyn everything. The next day, with Aunt Evelyn by my side for moral support, I approached a group of my classmates who were huddled near the campus coffee shop. I took a deep breath and spoke up. "Hey guys, I need to talk to you about something. About my mother." They turned to look at me, their expressions a mix of curiosity and weariness. And so I began to talk. I told them everything, about my childhood in a cold, loveless home, about being kicked out the moment I turned 18, about struggling to survive on my own until Aunt Evelyn took me in. As I spoke, I saw their expressions change from skepticism to shock and finally to understanding. By the time I finished, there were tears in more than a few eyes. One of my classmates, Sarah, stepped forward and hugged me. "Becky, I'm so sorry. We had no idea. Your mom, she made it sound so different." Word spread quickly after that. My classmates, now armed with the truth, became my fiercest defenders. When my mother tried to approach them with her tales of abandonment, they shut her down. The college security, alerted to the situation, began escorting her off campus whenever she showed up. A week later, I heard through the grapevine that my mother had given up and left town. She had returned to our hometown, taking a job as a nurse at the local clinic and renting a small apartment. I felt relieved and calm. Life had settled into a comfortable rhythm. After the tumultuous events with my mother, I found my footing again and threw myself back into my studies with renewed determination. My grades improved, and I was on track to graduate with honors. My phone flashed with a notice one typical afternoon while I was going over my notes for an impending test. It was a message from my father, who I had never seen before. As I opened it, curiosity and trepidation mixed in my breast. My heart skipped a beat. "Rebecca, I hope this finds you well," the note said. "I'm contacting you because I want to make a proposal. I recently got married again in Italy, and I now have a little boy. We need some daycare assistance. Would you be interested in staying with us? You may work as your half-brother's nanny. This may be a fantastic chance for you, as I am aware that you likely have few options there." Disbelief and laughter washed over me as I gazed at the television. He finally offered me a position as an unpaid nanny for a half-brother I had never met, after years of quiet. It was almost laughable in its arrogance. I typed a single word in answer without thinking twice. "No." My phone buzzed once again a few seconds later. My father started asking questions after I gave him a brusque response, which obviously surprised him. Where did I reside? How was I making ends meet? What was my life all about? As I browsed my photo collection, a cheeky grin appeared on my lips. I chose a photo of me laughing in Aunt Evelyn's warm kitchen and another of me on campus, grinning in front of the business school building. I emailed these pictures with no remarks. The reaction was instantaneous. Every message that came in was more desperate than the one before it. What had allowed me to attend college? How did I obtain the funds? Whose home am I residing in? I inhaled deeply, relishing the moment. The last thing I typed was, "That's none of your business." Almost definitively, I blocked his number. Graduation day finally arrived after several months had gone. I looked around the crowd as I waited in line to get my graduation. Aunt Evelyn was sitting there in the third row, her face beaming with pride. When my name was announced, she gave the biggest cheer, and I couldn't help but smile as I walked across the platform. I silently vowed to create a life that would make Aunt Evelyn proud as I looked at her. She had shown me love and support, and I would return the favor. I would demonstrate to her and the rest of the world that family is more than blood. It has to do with commitment, love, and decision.